Several scientific articles have published research on the T Rex devolving into a chicken. Recently, a teenage T Rex was found by these three kids, and the paleontologists believe that the Teen Rex weighed 3,500 pounds, stood 10 feet tall, was 20 feet long. In comparison, a fully grown T Rex could reach lengths of up to 40 feet or more and weigh up to 8,000 pounds. All of the dinosaurs, according to their theory, went extinct 65 million years ago, and the Tyrannosaurus Rex was around for about 100 to 150 million years. Other theories regarding dinosaur extinction claim that they farted themselves into extinction, that the methane produced by their flatulence heated the atmosphere so much that it produced global warming, which they showed that the methane produced by those giant long-necked dinosaurs would have been comparable to the methane that the world was pumping into the atmosphere each year. Evolutionists claim dinosaurs lived millions of years ago, but it's important to realize that when they dig up a dinosaur bone, it does not have a label attached showing its date. The Bible states that God made the land animals, including dinosaurs, on day 6, so they really date from around 6,000 years ago. Dinosaurs were originally vegetarian during the global flood. Many were buried and fossilized, but 2 of each kind survived on Noah's Ark. After they got off Noah's Ark, dinosaurs eventually died out due to human activity, climate changes, or other factors.
One of the interesting ways is they respond to pH. So the venom glands of some snakes have essentially cells in them like the cells in your stomach that secrete acid. And so they keep it a high acidic environment in the venom gland, and that essentially deactivates the toxin.
So you're saying...
And then when it bites you, the pH shift activates the toxins.
So when we're looking at animals that have these mechanisms, these tools for survival or killing or predatorial behaviors, you're saying something like snake venom might have a precursor to being some kind of digestive enzyme, or it still is?
Yeah, there's several ways you could try to explain it from the biblical perspective, right? So one, you could talk about you've taken something that was benign, that existed, let's say in Eden, and you shifted it.
The Tyrannosaurus Rex was a creature like the other dinosaurs that lived before the flood. For the bull, the horns are just there to explain to the lion to stay off his back. And so the scary features on animals are there to separate the ecosystems. They're there to keep the animals isolated in their own places, which is why the fossil record has these so-called periods. They say it's different time zones, but it's actually just different ecosystems that the animals were buried in.
How did Adam live to be 930 years old? Okay, there was a different environment. There was increased air pressure and oxygen levels. Additionally, the harmful effects of the sun was filtered out. Now, keep in mind, all of that went away at the time of the flood. You got to understand, when the windows of heaven were opened up and the rains came down, okay, that's where some of the water came from. The remainder of the water, the vast majority of it, came from underneath the earth, in the water that was underneath the surface. But that canopy of ice or water, that idea, that's gone. It was gone at the time of the flood. And if you look ages of the people, they were all living to be 900 years old, including Noah. And then all of a sudden, after the flood, what happened to their age? It goes 600, 400, 200, boom, 100. Abraham was 120 years old. Nobody ever lived longer than that again. Okay, because everything had changed after that. The original creation was gone, and we lived in a new environment after the flood. Okay, number 2, why don't we have giant animals and people today? Okay, we do, they are just rare. If you're willing to search a little bit, you'll find these accounts everywhere. Okay, this is a dictionary from 1946. Under the word dragon, the first 2 words of definition number 1 are now rare. Would not have been a problem in the original environment with greater air pressure and increased oxygen. We should remember also that reptiles are exothermic. Because they are cold-blooded, they would not have been able to survive the winters, not as easily. And did you know that seasons are never mentioned in the Bible until after Noah and his family get off the ark? Prior to that, in the original creation, it was perpetual springtime around planet Earth. Number 2, people hunted them for food, medicine, and because they were a nuisance. Now, let me ask you this. How many burgers do you think you could make out of a brachiosaurus? Right? Why wouldn't you hunt things? Also, as the earth was populated and people settled into areas we would call villages, towns, cities, you got to chase the scary animals away. How many grizzly bears live in Denver, Colorado, right now? I would imagine 0. How many you think lived there maybe 400 years ago? There's probably a lot in those areas. But as the population increases, all the scary animals move away further into the wilderness. Finally, answer number 3, why don't we have dinosaurs today? Are you sure there are no dinosaurs left today? Let's look at some of the stories through history about dinosaurs. And remember, what did we call dinosaurs? Dragons.
A scientist who's also religious, how do you believe that dinosaurs became extinct?
All right, that is a good question. Dinosaurs have always been something interesting to me. Even when I was a kid, dinosaurs are just awesome. So within a creationist timeline, if you're talking about young Earth creationism, there are 2 general views. All right, one is that the flood destroyed them and they went extinct at the flood. And the other is that Noah actually took some dinosaurs on the ark. Maybe they were, because we tend to think of dinosaurs as enormous, but they actually started out relatively small, young. So the idea is maybe not a giant dinosaur, but at least a young dinosaur is on the ark. And then those actually went extinct shortly after the flood. Some flood models describe the Ice Age happening right after the flood. There's certain reasons for that. I'm sure maybe Monty here could explain those better than me, but maybe they weren't adapted to the cold and they went extinct shortly thereafter. So those are the 2 basic views of what happened to the dinosaurs from a creationist perspective.
You know, it's kind of a mystery to a lot of people, a lot of us, because the Bible doesn't mention the word dinosaur. In fact, the word dinosaur is actually a fairly modern term. I think in the 1800s that paleontology really began to solidify as a science. So of course we're not going to see that word when Moses was writing the Pentateuch, and he wasn't saying these are dinosaurs, these are mammals, he was just like animals, large animals, land animals, sea animals, right? There wasn't a classification to him.
Right, and yeah, it is modern. Who is it? Sir Richard Owen was the person who coined the term dinosaur, late 1800s, I guess it was. And so, yeah, our taxonomic distinctions that we have now aren't something that the Bible writers would understand or think about. And in fact, I think that's true with most dinosaurs today. When most people say dinosaur, they're thinking about all these weird extinct creatures. When a paleontologist thinks of dinosaurs, they're thinking of something fairly narrow. There's these, they're all land animals generally. They have a particular hip structure, and that's what a paleontologist thinks of it as a dinosaur. So things like the Loch Ness Monster, you know, the long neck, that's technically not a dinosaur. Maybe you would call it a plesiosaur or something like that. Or those pterosaurs, pterodactyls we tend to call them, those technically aren't dinosaurs either. So yeah, taxonomy is very different, I think, for a biblical writer than a modern systematist.
According to the Bible, every living thing that God made, he destroyed, and he preserved a remnant of them, 2 of every kind, to go on the ark with a man called Noah. And a lot of people call this a myth, but there is literally a global flood legend in every ancient culture in the world, most of them, and most every ancient culture also speaks of dragons, okay? People slaying dragons, like Marco Polo reporting that the king of Babylon was pulling his chariots with dragons, and Alexander the Great reported to slay a dragon in a cave.
Here is the story of Gilgamesh. He was a Sumerian king who supposedly slew a dragon. One famous Chinese man named Yu. After the Great Flood, Yu surveyed the land of China and divided it into sections. He built channels to drain the water off to the sea and helped make the land livable again. Many snakes and dragons were driven from the marshlands when Yu created the new farmlands. St. George was credited with killing a dragon in 275 AD. You can find a bunch of these in this book right here. It was written by Dwayne Gish, and I am sure you can buy it on Amazon. Marco Polo lived in China for 17 years, around 1271 AD, and reported that the emperor raised dragons to pull his chariots in parades. In the year 1611, the emperor appointed the post of royal dragon feeder. Books even tell of Chinese families raising dragons to use their blood for medicines, and Polo was an explorer and a merchant who spent a great deal of time with his family in the Far East. And you can look this up. He wrote extensively about this. The city of Nurloc, France, was renamed in honor of the dragon that was slain there. It was described as being bigger than an ox and having long, sharp, pointed horns on its head. In May 13, 1572, Italian scientist Ulysses Aldrovandus obtained the dead body of a dragon and had it mounted for a museum display.
This article by Wikipedia on human and dinosaur coexistence says that one claim made by proponents of human-dinosaur coexistence is that non-avian dinosaur footprints have been found together with human footprints, with one particular site of note being Biloxi River in Texas. A lot of people don't believe these are legitimate footprints, but this is in fact a legitimate ancient artifact with 2 long-necked dinosaurs, and this is a petroglyph by Native Americans. This is an ancient temple with a stegosaurus carved into it.
Several thousand of these stones have been found. They are made of andesite and they have carvings. Many are not that interesting to me, but several of them have pictures of humans and dinosaurs together, like this one does. There are other carvings showing that man was very advanced a long time ago, even showing pictures of what we believe to be men performing surgery. Now, the main problem with these stones is that after they became popular, many locals started to fabricate them in order to sell them to the museum establishment. Unfortunately, because of this, they have all been written off as a forgery by many people, even the very first ones that were found.
the description of these dragons are either some kind of a fiery flying serpent, which the Bible talks about, or a giant terrifying lizard, which is what the word dinosaur means. And they're coming out of caves and they're staring people, and it's not always a description of a flying reptile. When you look at the Bible, it talks about behemoth, it talks about leviathan, it talks about even the fiery flying serpent. So you have dinosaurs depicted in these ancient cultures, and this is because dinosaurs lived in the antediluvian world before the flood.
In 1908, in Glen Rose, Texas, a discovery was made in the Paluxy River. The Paluxy River is a very fast-moving river. In 1908, there was a flash flood, and they said the water was 28 feet above the flood stage. The whole area is made of layers of limestone. So if you get into the riverbed is essentially just flat. Okay, it's just limestone right across there, and there are layers of it. In the 1930s, there was a team, I'm sorry, I skipped one part. During that flood, one of those layers of limestone on the bottom of the river ripped off and exposed a brand new fresh layer of limestone underneath that. In that layer, they found hundreds and hundreds of footprints. In the 1930s, there was a team that went down there to cut out the footprints and preserve them. They would sandbag off the river, pump out the water, and then cut out and remove the slabs of limestone with the footprints. They found hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dinosaur tracks running in every direction. Ronald T. Byrd, a field explorer, sorry, this is one of the most famous pictures. I don't know if you ever saw this little kid taking a bath in a dinosaur footprint. Anyway, that was in the Paluxy River. Ronald T. Byrd, a field explorer for the American Field Museum, reported 15 to 20-inch long, clearly defined human footprints with the dinosaur tracks. This is a cast of one of those footprints. And they are right next to those dinosaur tracks in the same layer of earth in the limestone in the Paluxy River. There are multiple museums down there where you can go and see these. They're not only, now that's impressive for two reasons. Number one, human footprints, we are told they're not supposed to be in the same layer of earth as dinosaur footprints, right? Aren't they supposed to be separated by like a quadrillion years? Okay, well, they weren't. They were contemporaneous. They lived together. And also, we find out that the footprints were giant.
The fresh tissue and blood cells of dinosaurs is constantly being extracted from the fossils, and they say that they died out 65 million years ago, which means that the bones are supposed to be at least 65 million years old, but the DNA, even theoretically, cannot last for more than 1.5 million years, even under the best preservation conditions. Therefore, it appears that the animals died recently.
Information in the fossils, this biological molecules that are still present in the fossils. So, like I've heard stories where construction workers will dig up dinosaur bones and it just smells like dead animals still.
Oh, wow.
You know, these bones are supposed to be 65, 100 million years old, and yet they still smell like dead animals. And when we look at dinosaur bones, when we dissolve, like we'll drop the bone in acid, and it'll dissolve away the minerals, but it'll leave the biological material, leave the protein, and we can see those proteins. Some of them are still stretchy.
Right.
We've even found DNA in some material that are supposed to be hundreds of thousands or even millions of years old. It's still alive.
Wow.
So it's a bit like walking into a cabin in the woods and you find a glass of milk on the table, and maybe there's a hamster in a cage, and it's still fresh and the hamster's doing fine.
Right.
Like, you know, it hasn't been there for 100 years.
Right. Right.
And so we find the same thing in geology.
When you find a fossil of a dinosaur, it's mixed together with an entire graveyard, just like every other kind of creature in the fossil record. They're found in mass graveyards. And most of the fossil record is marine animals without a backbone. That's because it's a marine deposit. The world was flooded, and that's how the dinosaurs went extinct. They say that carbon dating won't work on dinosaur bones because carbon-14 can only last for 50,000 years. It's introduced into the atmosphere by the cosmic rays that bombard it from the sun, and then the animals take in the C14, but then they stop taking it in when they die. So after they die, we know that there's no more C14 being introduced, therefore we can determine the starting amount of C14 when the creature was alive based on the amount of C14 in the atmosphere today. And if the current amount of C14 in the fossil or some kind of an ancient artifact is less than what the C14 in the atmosphere is today, then we can just determine the decay rate of the C14 and calculate the time at which the creature died.
So the big clock that scientists use is radiometric dating. So unfortunately, like in movies, it often comes up as carbon dating. That's not right. Carbon dating is a small part of radiometric dating. So for example, if we have a chunk of uranium, uranium turns into lead, throws off a lot of radiation, turns into lead over time. And so if I have a brick of uranium and I know that it started off 100% uranium, now it's 10% lead, then as long as nobody added lead and as long as the decay rate is constant, then I can plug some numbers into a calculator and I can tell you how old it is, theoretically, as long as my assumptions are correct.
Right.
But what's interesting is that there's internal inconsistency in radiometric dating, even though it's the big clock that everyone uses. There's internal inconsistency because if I find in a similar layer, in similar location stratigraphically, in the layer in the geologic record, maybe I find something, a crystal with uranium in it and something with carbon in it. I can send those both to the laboratory. The carbon will come out to maybe 35,000 years old, and the uranium will come out to 100 million.
Living mollusk shells were dated at 2,300 years old with carbon dating, and living snails were dated as old as 27,000 years. A mammoth was carbon dated, one part of it 29,000 and another part 44,000 years old with carbon dating. The strata, which preserves the dinosaur fossils, that's supposed to be dated at 65 million years old using other radiometric dating techniques, but according to carbon dating, it's 34,000 years old. If carbon-14 can only last for 50 to 100,000 years, then you shouldn't be able to find any measurable amounts in something like a diamond, which is dated to be at billions of years old, or a dinosaur fossil dated to be 65 million years old, but C14 in significant volumes is detected in diamonds and in dinosaur fossils. 8 PhD scientists in their relevant fields of scientific research examined the radiometric dating techniques to see if they could stand up to close scrutiny, and found that they were contradicting in every laboratory that they sent samples to. If they got an age from one laboratory and they sent the same sample to another laboratory, it came back with a different age. And with measurable amounts of C14 found throughout the entire geologic column, that means that the whole column and all of the Earth's geologic strata is less than 100,000 years old. So the way that radiometric dating works is you assume an initial volume of a parent element, like uranium decays into lead or potassium decays into argon at a certain known rate today. And so if you know the starting conditions, then you can determine how long the element has been decaying, and therefore you can determine what the age of a particular strata or artifact is. But if you don't know the initial starting conditions, then it's only theoretical. And if the atmosphere had different levels of C14 in it, then your measurement is going to be off because you didn't account for the different atmospheric conditions that existed at the time that the artifact or the strata was deposited. According to the hydroplate theory, constructed by Dr. Walt Brown, who has a PhD in engineering, the origin of Earth's radioactive elements could have been produced by the geophysics occurring during a global flood, placing high levels of radioactivity, indicating billions of years of decay at the lower layers of strata, and only millions or hundreds of thousands of years of decay at the top layers of strata. For more in-depth research on this, you can go to my Fountains of the Great Deep seminar, Part 1, Earth and Space Science from a Biblical Perspective, on the origin of Earth's radioactive elements. But these radiometric dates really just tell you how deep or how close to the surface you are in the geologic strata, and the time periods just represent ecosystems. What appears to be older fossils at the bottom are at the bottom. They're at a low altitude at sea level because they live in the sea. And the ones that are at higher altitudes are land-dwelling animals that live on the mountain.
Lickawalla Swamp is a completely inhospitable environment. Travel through it is typically less than 1 mile per hour, and mosquitoes are said to land on you at a rate of several hundred per second. The creature they are searching for is called Macaulay Mbembe. The pygmies that inhabit the area speak of the creature as commonly as we talk about a cow or a dog. The Malambo plant is the preferred food of Macaulay Mbembe. You can read a book that Dr. Roy Mackal contributed to. He's there holding the Malambo plant. Here, Dr. Mackal is examining a footprint of Macaulay Mbembe. Although Dr. Mackal has been unable to get a photograph of this creature, Eugene Thomas, who was a missionary for 42 years, had 2 pygmies in his church in the Congo. They claimed to have killed one of these creatures in the Congo. It is a big swamp. It is 55,000 square miles. To give you an idea of how big the swamp is, here is the United States in comparison to the Lickawalla Swamp. All of the states in red are 55,000 square miles. All the yellow states are smaller. So imagine a swamp the size of the state of Florida. You know what, scratch that. Imagine Florida. Okay? I mean, that's all it is anyhow. It's basically a swamp with some oranges. The swamp is said to be 80% unexplored. When explorers started their expeditions, stories started to come back of dinosaurs living in the jungle. This is an article from the New York Herald from 1910. Is a Brontosaurus roaming Africa's wilds? Here is an article from the Saturday Evening Post from 1948. After this expedition, they wrote a screenplay for the movie named Baby. It's about a baby Brachiosaurus found in the jungles of Africa. This gentleman, in case you don't know which one of the three I'm talking about, the one with the ridiculous hat, his name is Dr. Roy Mackal. He was a biologist from the University of Chicago. He traveled over to the Congo several times in search of the creatures.
I'm gonna water maple leaves in one thing.
It wasn't that long ago that dragons were understood as normal. You say that's impossible. I'm going to show you exactly how it worked. Here's the biblical timeline. We've gone over it many times. 6,000 years ago, God created everything. 4,400 years ago, there was a flood, a worldwide flood in the days of Noah that destroyed everything. 2,000 years ago, the Messiah came and died on a cross in Jerusalem while the Jews celebrated Passover. And at this point, in the beginning, God created all the dinosaurs in a 6-day creation, just like every other animal. At this point, most of the dinosaurs died and were fossilized during the flood in the days of Noah. Fossilization is not easy to accomplish. You need rapid burial. You cannot have animals hanging out in the atmosphere. They're picked apart by predators. The elements get to them. They need to be buried rapidly for fossilization to take place. And almost every fossil that we find took place at this time. Not only that, all the oil and natural gas on Earth, what is it? Where does it come from? It comes from decomposing organic matter. Then, the dinosaurs got off the ark 2 by 2. Some of them survived. A lot of them died due to the new atmosphere. They were hunted. They were a nuisance. And some point in the next 2,000 years, almost all the dinosaurs are extinct. Now, but most of them. Your father grows up and has a child, who is you, and you ask your father if he has ever seen a dragon. He says no, and he has only heard stories from his crazy old grandfather, who is your great-grandfather. And like that, dragons are believed to be a myth. Nobody is alive anymore that can give a first-hand account of seeing a dragon. They become a thing of legend and lore. At this point, all the dragons are gone and there is no one left who can give a first-hand account. Everyone who could give a first-hand account is now dead. And just like your great-grandparents, you don't know anything about them.